Welcome, Phil Barker and Poppy Buchanan Barker to Sweden. Thank you for having this chat with us and for making this film.
Thank you.
Can you tell me in a few sentences, what is the Tidal Model?
Good question. Very good question. We think that all people experience problems, difficulties in their lives. Everyone. And the Tidal Model is a way of thinking about how you might help someone. First of all, to be able to talk about those problems, or those difficulties, so that they might begin to think for themselves how they might begin to overcome them. Maybe not completely, but live a little bit better with those problems.
I think it's a model where it can be used by most people to help people in crisis. We hope it's jargon free, and we have been using it around the world. Our colleagues have been using it around the world. It has been developed by people in the services or who have been in services. So.
Yeah, how did you develop the Tidal Model? You had this idea and you have done it with lots of people, and I suppose it has evolved over time and made a change of it.
Yeah.
I think that's true, it has evolved.
It has, yeah.
The origins are probably over 30 years ago, with Poppy and I discussing our work. Poppy in social work, me in psychiatry, and we were discussing the kind of things that we would like to do different in our work. And probably the most common thing that we want to do different was we wanted to focus more on the strengths that people had rather than the things that were wrong with them, their faults or problems. And in the mid-1990s, I was asked when I was at the university in Newcastle, I was asked to help to develop an alternative model for nursing. And so Poppy and I put our heads together and we started to develop what grew into the Tidal Model. And so by 2000, we had developed the basis of what is known as the Tidal Model today. And since then, we have been revising and adapting, mainly through the influence of our colleagues, and especially the people who would be described as the patients, who helped us to appreciate how we could make it more relevant to their lives, more meaningful for them.
I think when we listen to people talking, both in our own work and when we started working together, we discovered that the kind of things people were telling us that they weren't getting, that they would like to get, was really important. Things like their voice wasn't heard. They felt that they didn't play a part in their actual care. And we started working out how we could help people change that, our colleagues change that. And I think that was a big starting point for the beginning of the model. It was the way we would have worked ourselves in our own work, yeah.
It sounds very much like it's a reality model rather than some armchair work.
Right.
Yeah.
So what are the key features of the Tidal Model?
Well, you've already mentioned trying to make it jargon-free.
The fact that the person who's seen as a patient is very unique. We would say as unique as their fingerprint. Their story is very unique. The model is all about the person's story and listening and hearing their story. and we would hope they would tell us their story in their own words, not as some psychiatric gobbledygook, as Phil would say.
Yeah.
So
there's a lot of the in nursing and in psychology and in psychiatry in general, psychotherapy, a lot of the theories and models that we have read and often studied are quite simple ideas that are made terribly complicated by the language which is used. And we wanted to develop a model which would be understandable, not just by the nurse, but would be understood by the person who's the patient and the patient's family. Because communication is the most important thing for us. We think that the whole purpose of our work is to communicate with people. And if people don't really know what it is you're saying, then you've already, the game is lost from the outset. So I think, Poppy's identified the key features, and they are also the things that probably make it different from other models that tend to be a little bit more obscure and for the expert. We always saw the person who was the patient as being the expert, and they would teach us. So in order to do that, there had to be a very simple way of communicating.
Yeah. So in that way it's really different from many other models.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you also put forth basic Tidal values that are really important.
yeah, we developed those a couple of years after we started working with the model. It was kind of developing itself, and we decided that we needed to have a value base, so people knew exactly what the model was about. And we had 10 tidal commitments, and this was a way to let people know if they were actually working with the model or not. And many of those are things like uniqueness and the basics of what we would see as good care.
Yeah.
And we felt that with the 10 commitments, they represented everything that you could possibly do within the Tidal model. But one of our colleagues then came and said to us, well, if he was going to evaluate whether the staff were doing that, how could we help them? And he actually asked us, because it was a popular practice at the time, was to write competences. And he said, could we write competences which he could measure whether or not nurses were valuing the voice or being the apprentice.
Yeah.
And so we wrote 2 competences for each tidal commitment. And so a lot of people have used these as a way of assessing to what extent the team were actually practicing the tidal commitments. And it's another way of, I suppose, taking the temperature of the service to see whether or not those values were in practice. And that, I think, the tidal commitments has been the thing which has caught most people's imagination, because it represents the core philosophy, and people realise that that's the thing they should always be asking themselves. Am I valuing the voice? Am I being the apprentice? Am I helping people to, imagine taking the step into the future?
These are indeed important questions. And could you use those with everybody, or who could you use model with?
Well, we would say you could use them with everybody, or most people. The kind of work that we've done in the past, we would think that we could probably have used them, and probably have used them with the people that we worked with. I'm not really sure who you couldn't use them with if you had a mind to do it. and you were confident to do it. So I think it's been kind of shown that it's because they've been so widely used and written about. I think they have been very easy to adapt to various situations.
I think providing that that people can communicate, you would use this with anyone. But even, well, you worked with people who had great communication.
Yeah, who didn't verbalise,
Yeah.
but used things like sign language, pictures. I used it with people I worked with many years ago in a different kind of way. You had to be creative to work with it, with certain people. But then that's our whole philosophy, I guess, that being creative is the most important thing when you're working with people, because you never know what they're going to throw up at you next, or you never know what's going to happen next. So we would always say that's the main thing. So yeah, I think you could use it with anybody, but you might have to be very creative.
Yeah, and I think that's another distinguishing feature about the model, is we wanted it to be a flexible model, not something that was rigid, where everybody was doing exactly the same thing, you know, everywhere you went. And that's what we have witnessed. We've witnessed that people have made adjustments to suit the setting they're working in, suit the people they're working in. There was a team in England who worked with people who were on the autistic spectrum and who had difficulty with verbalising, and they developed a very elaborate pictogram system where people could use pictograms to represent what it was that they were feeling or thinking. But you have to have people with that creativity in the first place.
But I think that's the other reason that the Tidal Model went around the world and took off much quicker than we thought it would, because we didn't have any rules in the model. People were able to use the model the way that was best for their service, because obviously we didn't know all the services. And I'm sure if you use the model in Sweden, you'll probably end up using it quite differently from the way they use it, say, in Scotland or in Australia when they use it. So it was that kind of thing, I think, that people liked. They could adapt it, they could be creative in their own service. So that was important, I think.
So the model is flexible, and you need to be creative as a person to make the most of this flexibility, I suppose.
Yeah.
Are there other things about the person who, or the nurse who use the model that they need to be aware of?
I think when we think about the people who have been the best examples of the Tidal Model in practice, they would be people who were quite comfortable thinking for themselves. I think that, especially within nursing, no disrespect to nursing, but a lot of nurses want to be told what to do, or they want to have some kind of guideline which they can follow. And that is the opposite of thinking for yourself. I think that most of the people that we would, our colleagues who would say are good examples of the Tidal Model in practice, have been people, and they're not necessarily older, some of them were quite young, but they were quite confident and ambitious to do what they thought was the right thing. And so creativity was part and parcel of that.
I think they have to have a real interest in the people that they're working with as well. I think they have to be really interested in the people themselves, as people, not as patients. I think they have to have a confidence in sitting down, talking to people and listening to them. And what Phil would call giving them a good listen to, giving them a good ear. It's really important. It's not just a case of ticking boxes. So I think that's, again, something that makes it kind of different from other forms of help that people are offered.
And I think that, I mean, to draw an analogy, there's a garage in our local village where we always take our car to be serviced or any repairs. The mechanics are just working with a machine, but we always have the sense that they really care about what they are doing. they're very attentive to detail. They find things that we're not aware of, and they make an effort to do a really good job. And that's just with a lump of metal. If someone is working with a person, we would hope that they would have the same kind of attention to detail, the same kind of interest in the person, make the same, if not better, effort to do a good job. So I think that all of those kind of features are things that one would hope that the nurse had. If they didn't have that, well, we wouldn't allow them to fix our car, never mind to fix a member of or help a member of our family.
Yeah. So people who has actually started to implement the Tidal Model, what do they say about it?
I think for many people, they got a shock when they started to implement it. We would go to places and do a workshop with a team, and they would say, at the end, they would say, yes, Phil and Poppy, we'd love to work in this way, but you're over ambitious, or we don't have the time. One place said, we can't do the Tidal Model because we don't have a photocopier. And we thought, well, that's a bit of an odd one. But however, when we went back to that place, we went back 3 months later, and they had got access to a photocopier, and they had started working with the Tidal Model with some of the people in their ward who had been in the ward over and over again, in and out, in and out. And they couldn't wait, the staff couldn't wait for us to get in. I don't even think we were sitting down, and they started telling us what they saw as successes that they'd had just by sitting down and actually talking and listening to the people. Things that they didn't know about the people. They'd known the people for years, as I say, they'd been in and out of their service, but they hadn't known things about them. They'd only known them as patients, they didn't know them as people. And that was really interesting for them. And it really livened the staff up, didn't it?
Yeah.
And they saw that as a great success. And we found that over and over again, that once people start actually using it in their own practice, they're quite surprised by the results that they get.
Yeah.
And obviously it does work, because people wouldn't be using it around the world if it didn't.
Yeah.
I think it would have been found out by now.
Yeah. I think the commonest thing, this is something you always say, the commonest thing that people say is it reminds them of why they came into nursing in the first place.
Yeah.
And I developed this alignment I've used a lot in our presentations. We haven't met anybody who said, I wanted to become a nurse because I wanted to spend all day locking and unlocking doors, or punching data into a computer, or standing guard over somebody.
Mm.
Most of the people that we know as nurses wanted to become a nurse because they wanted to help somebody. They might not have known how they were going to do this, which is why they took the training and education, but they had that basic vocation to help people. And I think the Tidal Model, for many people, this reminds them, well, this is how you might begin to do this. It's one way to do this, to help people. And I think that is important.
So there are some challenges, but once overcome, it's very rewarding for them, for the nurses and caregivers. What about the people at the receiving end?
Well, when we go back to places, we usually meet the people on the receiving end. They're usually quite happy to come and speak to us. And they have said there's been a big difference in how they've been treated in the unit. People have given them time, they've felt their voices being heard, people have listened to them. They would say all the kind of things that we would have hoped they would say. They said, one place said there was a more human face to the staff. Yeah. They felt they got to know the staff a bit better because the staff were sitting down with them and actually taking an interest in their story. Mm-hmm. And I think on the whole, I mean, the people have said things like, I didn't want to do it I didn't want to do it, and I fought against doing it. I didn't want to, more paperwork, more things. But they said once they realised what they were being asked, they were being asked about themselves as people, they found that really, really freeing, and they really enjoyed doing it. And it was hard for them at times, and they said they felt quite emotional at times when they thought about things, when they were answering the questions. But on the whole, I think we got a good response.
Yes. And in some senses, well, in one very important sense, that shouldn't be surprising, because all of the processes that are currently in use within the Tidal Model were all approved by people who either were or had been psychiatric patients. And the Tidal Model was probably unique in that sense that, certainly from our reading, most nursing models were written by some professor of nursing from an office, just out of her or his professional experience. Most psychotherapy models are based on the psychotherapist's experience of practice, but it's very much what the psychotherapist thinks is important. And of course, most of those psychotherapy, psychology, nursing models are all professional things. They're all quite complicated. We think that those people find the Tidal Model useful to them, meaningful to them, mainly because the people who helped us to develop it made sure that it was going to be meaningful, that it was going to work in a simple and straightforward way. And so that isn't just satisfying to us, it's also, it's very satisfying to the colleagues who did help us in the very beginning, and many of whom we are still in contact with. They made a contribution to the Tidal Model that is now paying dividends for the people who have taken over from them, if you like, as patients in the system.
Yeah, that's great. It's been a lot. It's meant a lot for a lot of people.
Indeed, indeed.
And I understand has made a great difference for you too as well, because when you talk about it, you can see that this is important.
Well, it was important to us because we worked with so many people over the years. People have become friends, we've had good colleagues, and the Tidal Model isn't just us, and that's really important because the work that's been done with the Tidal Model around the world, we haven't done it. It's been our colleagues around the world. They own the work, and it's really been them who should be getting the thanks for the work that they've done with it, and the way they've developed it in their own services and the people they've helped. For us, we would say it's the way that we would like to be treated. If, God forbid, one of us had to go into care, we would love to be treated that way. So I guess it's that old saying, treating people how you would want to be treated.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yes, because we were talking about that only the other day. I remember as a young student nurse in the hospital I trained in, going to a meeting with the man who was the chief nurse, and at that time, and one of my colleagues asked he was called the chief nursing officer, how should he treat the patients? And I remember vividly the chief nurse turning to him and saying, "That's quite simple. Treat everybody as you would want to be treated yourself." And it's an old truism, and I think it's one of the fundamental ethics, I think, of our practice, and I think that's what's probably been most rewarding for us, is that we have realised that the world is changing, the world is becoming more complicated, changing in all sorts of ways, but there still are a lot of people who want to stay close to that old ethic. Do as you would be done by, we say.
And I don't think that'll ever change.
Well, I don't
or
think
it shouldn't
so.
change.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
And that's also important that many of the ideas that lie at the base, the foundation of the Tidal Model, are very old ideas about people and society. And I think it's been a privilege for us to be involved in trying to find ways of keeping those ideas alive, and certainly doing things as a team is an important part of those things.
It's been exciting for us.
Very
Yeah,
exciting.
I can imagine. It's been also exciting to read about it and to hear about it, and I also think to work with it in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you.